News flash, George Strait is not a member of the Grand Ole Opry.
Oh my God.
Oof, I know it sounds like some BS, but it's true. While the Opry has dozens of members, including many less well-known talents, from youngsters to comedians, George Strait's name does not appear along those honored names. In fact, it's not even clear if George has ever played on the Opry at all. So, is this the snub of the century? Today we're gonna find out why George Strait isn't a member of the Grand Ole Opry. To do that, we're gonna have to dig into the history and truth of the Opry itself. We're going to examine its controversial history, its complicated membership system, and the possibility of a decades-long feud between its leadership and George Strait. We'll find out why exactly the Opry doesn't honor one of the most successful and illustrious performers in country music history. Heck, in music history in general. Before we dive in, please give this video a thumbs up to show support, and subscribe to the channel to show support to George and us. Now light your torch and grab your pitchfork as we go see why the King of Country doesn't have a crown, as we find out. What happened? The Opry. The Grand Ole Opry, of course, is one of the most influential institutions in country music history, comparable with the pickup truck, a trusty dog, or an ice-cold beer. It's helped launch and preserve the careers of more stars than you can name. Hank Williams was famously propelled to stardom after performing a cover of Lovesick Blues on the show. All I do is sit and sigh, oh Lord, that last long day. After previously auditioning and failing, of course, everyone's favorite Dolly Parton has been performing with the Opry for over 50 years. Even famous performers who weren't aided by the Opry have legendary stories associated with it. In 1956, Johnny Cash debuted at the Opry, where he drunkenly smashed the stage lights. He was asked not to return, but he also met June Carter Cash, so you win some, you lose some. And that's why it's so shocking that another one of the greatest institutions in country music has, for all purposes, ignored George Strait. So, is there beef between these two eminent figures? If so, it wouldn't be the first time. In fact, the Opry's history is full of shocking controversies, more than you'd expect for such a revered and traditionalist organization. Running afoul of the Opry. In some ways, the Opry is like that one beautiful girl who's always single because she's so picky. Many very famous performers have had less than ideal relationships with the eminent production. Because here's the thing. The Opry has a very complicated relationship with country music, partially because it's been around for so long, and the Opry has always fought to maintain strict standards for what's considered country music, while still putting on an exciting show and drawing listeners.
Every time they ask me why, I just smile and say.
Early on, a debate raged over whether drums and electronic instruments should be permitted. By World War I, electric and steel guitars were allowed, but a full set of drums wasn't until 1967. This debate, and the larger question of what's permitted at the Opry, has embroiled some of music's biggest names. There's the aforementioned Johnny Cash meltdown. And in 1954, Elvis took the stage, and the audience was polite. But he was told after the show, also politely, that his scandalous take on rockabilly had no place at the Opry. When the Byrds performed in 1968, they were confident that audiences would love their countrified take on rock and roll. Well, they couldn't have been more wrong. The Byrds, one of the greatest 60s-70s groups, was heckled, booed, and mocked as dirty hippies. And then there's Jerry Lee Lewis, frankly who the booker should have never let within 100 feet of the venue.
You broke my will, but what a thrill. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire.
The famous wild man was given two conditions: no rock and roll and no profanity. He, of course, ignored those requests, and not politely at all.
So kind to tell this world that you're mine.
So now we get to George Strait. Of course, he's not known for being a rock and roll sicko. So why would the Opry have a problem with him? To get to the bottom of this, we're gonna have to figure out how the Opry actually works. How does the Opry work? The basic idea is simple. You perform regularly at the Opry, you're publicly asked to join, in which case you're expected to regularly perform there, literally until you die. And these restrictions are pretty, well, strict. So just how frequently are members expected to perform? In 1963, musicians had to show up no less than 26 times per year, more than twice a month. And although this number has since been lowered to 12, that's still quite a commitment for a musician to make.
But you're certainly not just a little puppy, yeah.
While there are sometimes exceptions made while members are physically incapacitated, like when Randy Travis suffered a stroke. And we have a whole Randy Travis deep dive if you want to learn more about his ups and downs. The Grand Ole Opry's rules are so strict, there's only 69 living members. According to some people, even that is too many for the Opry. Country singer Stonewall Jackson sued the organization for alleged age discrimination in 2007, claiming the Opry was trying to force him out in an effort to purge older members. But we must say this was never substantiated. The long and short of it is that there are quite a few megastars that have never been inducted. For example, Willie Nelson. But few of them have as much legendary reputation and traditionalist bona fides as George Strait. So what the heck is the big deal? Many have speculated about what elaborate feud could have caused his omission. Some bigwig who George once offended at a party, somebody's girl who was stolen. But very few of these have any basis in reality. So what really happened? Well, the answer is quite simple. The answer. Okay, I apologize in advance for a huge oversimplification, but for country music, the South has two big chunks. There's a shared cultural understanding between Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, etc. And while each of these places sure has their own unique cultural identity, they also share a lot too. Then you have the other half, Texas. Just Texas, which earns its outsized role from the size of its borders and its ego. And George Strait, of course, is a Texas guy. This is clear not just from songs like All My Exes Live in Texas, but also from the influence of the state on his music in general. And George still lives in Texas, sharing time between his many properties. So here's the problem. The Opry doesn't make exceptions for distance, and it's just not feasible for George to commute to Nashville many times a year, in addition to his normal touring and recording schedule, no matter how much he would like to. So it just doesn't make sense for the Opry to invite him. Coincidentally, living in Texas is the same reason Willie Nelson has been excluded. He used to be a member back when he lived in Nashville.
And walked away, and I'll bet you dread to spend.
So that settles one question, but there is another one, just as important, that fans have been asking for years. You see, you don't have to be a member of the Opry to perform. In fact, many famous entertainers who aren't in the Opry do take the stage regularly. So why not George Strait, who definitely isn't a regular? Has George Strait ever performed at the Opry? You might think answering this question is pretty easy. The Opry is super famous, there's lots of recordings of their shows. But here's the issue, if you just look at recent years, there's no record of George playing the Opry. But if you go back a bit farther, after lots of digging, we did find the following. Strait did play the Opry, it's just been a very long time. Although I'm sure to many it feels like just yesterday. The date was Saturday, October 9th, 1982. Yes, it was a different world back then, very early in George Strait's career. He was promoting his second album, Straight from the Heart. But unfortunately, there is no known recording of his performance. And it doesn't seem like the appearance did much for George's career. But I know and you know he didn't really need the help, given his success and his massive talent. So while I was initially shocked to hear that George wasn't a member of the Grand Ole Opry, I had to remind myself that the Opry has still done a lot of good for country and Western music. It's been a launching pad for many of the genre's biggest talents, and it's helped maintain tradition in a country with a constant identity crisis. So even if technicalities prevent guys like George Strait from performing regularly, we can still count on the Opry for bringing a little dose of sanity to a crazy, crazy world. As for George, I don't think he's too impacted by his omission. He's going on a stadium tour this summer, and he's playing not one but 2 shows in Nashville. But I don't think he has any plans of leaving Texas anytime soon. Heck, in 2018, he was elected Texan of the Year. A lot of people in Texas, that's a big honor. Alright, now we want to hear from you. Is the Grand Ole Opry still so important in country music and Western music as it used to be? Should they adjust their standards to make room for guys like George who can't travel to Nashville as frequently? And finally, has anyone ever been to a show at the Grand Ole Opry? Who did you see perform? Get in the comments and tell us all things country music, George Strait, and the Grand Ole Opry. Before you head out of here, please give this video a thumbs up if you don't mind. It really helps. Subscribe to our channel and come back often so we can keep telling you.
Carrying your love with me.